In the next few minutes, we're going to look at Psalms 53. And in Psalms 53, we see David writing about the person who is rejecting, even denying the existence of God. He writes in that first verse, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt and they have done abominable iniquity, and there is none who does good." Well, David thinks about those who are denying the existence of God and came to the conclusion that they are foolish. He used the words fools. The idea behind the ancient Hebrew word translated fool is more moral than it is intelligence. David, I'm sure, wasn't talking about those who weren't smart enough to figure out God. After all, who is? We can see that the fool actually says, there is no God, or there is no God for me. Not only does he not believe in God, but David insinuates that he also acts on it. His behavior follows it. David says all this because of the plain evidence that there is a God, evident in both the creation and the conscience that Paul talks about in Romans chapter 1. But notice, just because someone denies the existence of God doesn't make it false. But instead, he speaks of their position as fools or foolish. The Apostle Paul wrote in Romans 1, verse 22, "Professing to be wise, they become fools." The fool, they deny what is evidently plain. They deny a moral authority in the universe. They believe what is only supposedly proven in a scientific method or even at the laboratory. And they take a losing gamble that there is no God. There are many powerful arguments for the existence of God. The existence of the universe, there must be a creator. The existence of design in the universe would indicate that God is a designer God, or the unique nature of the character of humanity, that there is a relational God, and also that the morality means that there is a governing God in the universe. Well, the God-denying person David mentions is not only guided by intellectual objections to the existence of God. Instead, he says, in his heart. In his heart, he wishes God away, typically for fundamental moral reasons. Jesus said in John 3:20, he says, "For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed." This means that the man David has in mind is not an atheist primarily because of intellectual reasons. And so when the preacher or when the Christian talks to, say, an atheist, we might not only speak to their minds or their head, but also their heart, speaking about the love of God as well. David writes that they are corrupt. It's a dangerous place to be in the sight of God. He says, and they have done abominable iniquity. David here thinks of the results of denying God. It leads people into corruption and an abominable behavior and iniquity that God looks at with disgust and even anger. God doesn't think everything you and I do is cute. As David considered the sin of the atheist, he looks out at humanity, which would be all of us, and it concludes that there is none who do good. He didn't mean that there was no human good in the world, but that fallen man is so fallen that he doesn't always do good by his own power or his own instinct. We are born with both the will and the capacity to do bad, to do evil. No one has to teach the child to do bad. And it's often easier to encourage others to do bad than to do good. And that's atheist and apologist alike. Even some of our good deeds are the selfish, who have selfish motives. We often wink at atheism, but it's not just a harmless error. It is an offensive sin obviously to God, anyone who would deny his existence. It is foolish. It would be harmful to our own situation. And in verses 2 and 3, we see what heaven's picture is of this fallen humanity that David writes about. He says, God looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek God, and every one of them has turned aside. They have together become corrupt. And again, he says, there is none who does good, no, not one. Didn't Paul The Apostle Paul quote that, I believe, in Romans 3. And while mankind might wish that they could forget about God, God never forgets about mankind. He never forgets about you and I. He is always observing men looking down from heaven, it says, upon the children of men. There's often the wish that God would just leave us alone. Isn't that an unwise wish? Because all of human life depends upon God. And Paul preaches about that again in Acts chapter 17. This is an impossible, maybe even a foolish wish, because God has rights as the creator over his creation. This reminds us of the time God came down from heaven to observe that foolish pride of those in the book of Genesis who were building the Tower of Babel. Well, when God looks down from heaven, one thing he sees and he looks for, are there anyone who understands? Is there anyone who is seeking among the people? A person may be religious and ritualistic, may even love the worship team, but not really seeking God at all. Many people often seek an idol that they create, not the true God who reigns and is alive and well. When God looks, this is what he finds. He finds that mankind has turned away from God and has therefore become corrupt. When God finds none who does good, it's because there aren't any. It isn't as if there were some and God can't see them because of the tall buildings or the rainforest, and he just doesn't see them. David here observes that man is truly, deeply fallen. Don't forget, David uses that there is none who does good, broadens the view even from the atheist to you and I. Well, looking at verses 4 and 5, God defends his people, where he says, has the worker of iniquity no knowledge who eat up my people as they eat bread and do not call upon God? He says, there they are in great fear where no fear was. For God has scattered the bones of who encamps against you. You have put them to shame because God has despised them. God's people might seem like the weak fools, but David understood it is the workers of the iniquity who have no knowledge. It looks like the workers of iniquity are strong and have the advantage. Hello, kind of looks familiar maybe in your society today. He says, and does not call upon God. Atheism is, of course, prayerlessness. What a sad description of someone, of a church that experiences prayerlessness. Let us be a people of prayer because we believe and we trust God. He says, there they are in great fear where no fear was. David trusted that God would put the enemy in great fear, even though their strategic place and their outnumbering the believers, the position gave them no reason to fear in the first place. So we know that God is awesome. God is in control. Don't give up. Keep praying. It might look hopeless, but God is in charge. God is the creator God. And we say there is a God, no matter what the rest of the culture, society is saying to us. And as the song says, it may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by God. David prayed for something that God had promised an obedient Israel. He promised it to him in the book of Leviticus. David prayed for something that God had done on other times. There were many times when God sent fear into the hearts of Israel's enemies. Of course, you know that Joshua against the Canaanites, Gideon against the Midianites, and Jonathan and his armor bearer against the Philistines. The fear of God is either an impelling motivator or leading us in our way to live, or it becomes a compelling terror, expecting destruction. David says, you have put them to shame because God has despised them. Here God answers the fool who despises him with despising the fool in return. It was not only the fool's denial of God that provoked God, but it was more the fool's attack against the people of God. And we might say that attacking the people of God is just as foolish as denying God's existence. I would imagine that is a dangerous place to be. Finally, in verse 6, David is longing for God's salvation. Oh, that the salvation of Israel would come out of Zion. When God brings back the captivity of his people, let Jacob rejoice and Israel be glad. David knew that God was a refuge for his people and that the workers of iniquity would never win. And we know it's hard to see that in the present time, but David expressed that desire that God would bring the victory and deliverance. And he had that anticipation and that belief and trust. And he knew that God was real and very real in his life and in the life of those people of Israel and you and I, of the believers in the culture and society in which we live. We know and we believe, God, that we have that victory in Jesus, not only in our future and eternity, but also here and now today. Here it's thought that the word captivity is used in a general sense, speaking of any time or situation that God's people are oppressed. But David anticipated that deliverance and called the people of God to be joyful in the thought of it. And we have that deliverance. We have peace with God through faith in our Lord Jesus Christ. Then we move ahead in spiritual maturity. Let us live believing and trusting in God, enjoying the journey and being the light in today's culture. Well, I hope this helps somebody in these quick minutes, but know this, that we'll be praying with you. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time.